Hello again, everyone. We meet again. Welcome to our next presentation on our final day of GALA Connected. My name is Maria. I'm GALA Board Director, and we've just wrapped up a very interesting discussion about the evolution of project management. So I'm truly delighted to kick off the next session where we will explore the last mile challenge in the localization industry. Just a reminder, add your questions to the Q&A section. Don't leave them until the end so that everybody else can vote. And I'm truly thrilled to welcome our speaker, Henrik Kuhneman. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Henrik has over 10 years experience in the language services industry, and he's the founder and CEO of Yellownape, a company that specializes in building automation tools and providing consulting services. All of it powered by Henrik's passion to leverage technology for client and partner win-wins. One of Henrik's other passions outside of the localization industry is music. He gets great enjoyment from exploring new genres and artists, and he's always eager to discover new music. So feel free, make sure that you connect with him, look out for him at the lounge, or connect with him on LinkedIn and exchange tips and recommendations. So, Henrik, thank you very much for speaking to us today and giving this presentation. The floor is yours. Feel free to share your slides.
Okay, I will share then. All right. Yes. So, on the agenda today is 4 points, and thank you for having me, by the way. We'll start with examining the concept of the last mile challenge, the history of it all. We will see how this might apply to the localization industry, segue into two scenarios, and wrap up with the recap. And I timed this to about 20 minutes, so there will be time for questions at the end if you have any comments or wanna discuss something. So let's dig in. The concept of the last mile challenge has its origins in the telecoms industry. There and then it was about the last mile of copper wire when connecting new nodes like homes and businesses and telephones basically to the existing network. And the challenge there was that this last stretch of copper wire was less economically viable than the copper wire in the central network. There basically were no economies of scale because it was only one person or one telephone, one node that should use that last stretch of wire, and that made it more expensive in relation to the rest of the network. So the challenge was, how do we expand the net in a way that is economically viable without losing too much of the economies of scale. Nowadays, of course, there's not much copper wire being laid down, but the concept actually has reappeared in a new context, and that context is e-commerce. E-commerce then implies, at least in an optimal way, a streamlined order process with a highly efficient supply chain up to more or less the last node before the final delivery to the consumer. And we're talking about home deliveries here, of course. And just like in the telecom network, the process is branching here at the last node, because the cost of transporting a shipment, an order, a parcel, this last stretch from the transport hub to the is relatively speaking much higher than any of the previous legs. The economies of scale are lost because it's just only one customer in practice, one recipient that has to bear the cost of this last leg. So the challenge in this regard would be then to solve this last stretch, because if you don't do that, you won't be competitive, and you will be forced to absorb the costs in order to keep the clients happy. In the delivery of localization services, however, there's not only a last mile challenge, there's also a first mile challenge, because in language services, and language services is the language services industry is different from retail, of course, in many ways. One of them being that the product that's being delivered depends on what the buyer brings into the relation, into the order. The buyer brings the source content that then is being transformed into target content, in one or many languages. And then, of course, through the use of standardized processes and the deployment of specialized IT systems, you still can attain economies of scale, even though every piece of source text in every order, in some sense or in principle, is unique. And just like in e-commerce, the challenge here is to overcome the fact that efficiency will be unevenly distributed throughout the process. And economies of scale will be harder to attain, not only at the end, but also at the beginning of the process. So regardless of how efficient the internal processes of production have been devised, getting the content for translation and delivering it back to the buyer will require some additional and client-specific effort. On the top level, the process might look something like this, and this would then correspond to something, the order to cash process in retail. And at this level, of course, it looks clean and straightforward. But as we drill down, there are many tasks hidden here to be performed on a deeper level, because the sub processes will contain a lot of tasks and that are performed in a number of IT systems, like TMSs and BMSs and CAT systems and ERPs, this type of acronym systems. And these systems, as such, solve specific problems and functions then as islands of aggregated functionality and potential efficiency. These systems makes it possible to streamline production and to attain these economies of scale, even though every source text taken for itself is unique. And these systems and platforms are like digital islands of efficiency, but in between these islands, in the gaps between them, we find ourselves in uncharted territory sometimes. While the process is moving about on the same island, like on the same system or in the same platform, the system of systems, the transactions will most likely be smooth and for the most part colorless. And this is something that we cannot take for granted for transactions between different islands, because and such transactions across the systems always carries with them the risk of high friction and high effort. To make this a bit more tangible, let's consider the analog and the digital as aspects of a process, as aspects of reality even. Everything that people do is analog. Even the digital is analog in some sense. The digital is also always anchored in the analog, in people, users. and ultimately, of course, in semiconductors and electricity. And from a process point of view, the analog register is rich and flexible, but relatively slow and difficult to scale. The digital register, on the other hand, is based on abstractions, on models, on approximations, on simplifications of the analog, simplifications created to solve some specific problem, like managing a translation process, or streamlining the order process by creating an online shop, or automating some data entry task in an administration. And well-designed models and well-formulated problems actually will make it possible to achieve substantial gains in efficiency and scalability of a process. Every process has an analog component, and almost every process these days, I would go so far as to say that every process also has some digital component. Software actually is everywhere. It's eating the world, and it's not stopping. Likewise, in localization, the same thing. And here, it's common to encounter last mile challenges. These switches in the loss of economy of scales in situations where content or data that is set to travel from one digital system to another has to make a stopover in the analog realm on its way to its final destination. And coming back to the process, it involves interactions with multiple systems and multiple transactions between these systems. And looking at the systems, there's a difference between transactions to and from systems that are under the process owner's control, under the supplier's control, and transactions to and from systems that are not under the process owner's control, that are not under the supplier's control. And this is from the perspective of the supplier, of the supplier of language services. In the example, systems related to tasks in the orange ring would belong to the supplier, the process owner, who is then free to adapt sub-processes and deploy efficiency measures at their own discretion. This is to minimize the risk of stopovers in the analog realm, or try to eliminate them completely. In what's called System A, on the other hand, options are limited. The supplier is not the one that picked the system. It's probably the buyer's system, and it might not. The supplier might not even be in a position to influence how tasks should be performed there. And when data is traveling across systems, there's the risk of it having to make this stopover in the analog realm. And this risk increases significantly if you don't have high-level access to all the systems involved. And here, there is an increase in risk to and from System A, where the supplier is invited to play, but can't make the rules. So we're going to drill down into this first mile a bit. When we look at the initial phase of the order process, the order received box, the first question to ask is, who is the sender? Where does the order come from? Because there's a significant difference if the signal originates from the analog, from some person, or if it originates from a system. In the first scenario, that the impulse that triggers the order process comes from some person, from the analog. Here there are a couple of possibilities. If this is a low frequency or a low volume type buyer, a strategy for dealing with this last mile challenge would be to arrange the process in a way that restricts input and pushes administrative workload of data entry basically to the buyer. The way to do this would be to redirecting the order process to pass through something like a customer portal, or even something as basic as an order form. That would be one way to accomplish the same thing as you would accomplish in a physical store where you deploy a self-service checkout station. Apart from giving the buyer the freedom of self-service, the administrative workload of data entry is also shifted from the supplier to the buyer. Also, all the while, the supplier stays in control of the shape and form of the information that is generated here at the point of sale. The customer gets to do the work themselves, and at the same time, the customer generates the right kind of digital artifacts. In more complex settings, where frequency or volume is a bit higher, the portal strategy might not be a good fit. In such a setting, since the signal then contains both the building blocks of a client relationship and elements that will trigger actions in various IT systems, the challenge is to separate out the different parts so that the digital relevant parts can trigger processes in the digital realm, and at the same time, the client can be served in a good way in the analog way. This means more or less absorbing the complexity of the process as an investment in the deal with the client, letting the client do what they do and dealing with the complexities that arise. Another scenario, then the second one is that the signal that triggers the orders process that makes it go off originates in the digital realm, in the digital register, and that this signal, or that the order more or less is being dispatched by way of some IT system. For more mature buyers, the separation of the analog and the digital will have occurred before the individual order. And here, the supplier is most likely part of a process that has been put into place in order to solve a last mile challenge upstream. And failure to deal with this accordingly and more explicitly, treating this type of order like an analog order will, or like an order originating from the analog register, will mean substantial pain in the process. A human that receives a message from an IT system telling them to take actions in some other system, or for that matter, even in the same system. Such a human, in essence, would, at least for the purposes of this task, function as expensive and rather slow API endpoint. And if at all possible, this should obviously be avoided, both since it's both for the sake of the business and for the sake of the co-worker. The strategy in this scenario would be to collaborate with and mirror the buyer to understand where in the process you're at and act accordingly. And at the minimum, the same type of efficiency measures as deployed by the buyer should be then deployed in the supplier's process. Like, for example, if the buyer has automated handoff creation, then the supplier should automate the the handoff processing and delivery as well. To ferry the content into their own court, to their own island, and where it can resume the efficient processing as well, so that you don't get this stopover in the analog realm, where some human will have to go to some system and get some data, or get the link, get the metadata, something like that, and then copy paste it into some other system. Yeah. So to wrap things up, last miles in localization often relate to digital content having to make stopovers in the analog realm. Depending on the volumes and the maturity of the buyer, different strategies can be put into action to offset the risk of or just plainly eliminate stopovers. For low volumes, at least on part of the individual buyer, the strategy should be to make it easy for the client to do the right thing. This sounds way better in Swedish, lätt att göra rätt. So, but it basically means that you get the buyer to do the right thing, and the right thing here being do what you do, by restricting input and making sure that you can process the business data that has been generated then in an efficient way. For medium volumes or for low to medium maturity level of the buyer, for such scenarios, the strategy should be to absorb the process complexity with a minimum of adjustments to the buyer's existing processes. Understanding and respecting the buyer's existing processes and using a non-invasive approach will put you in a very good position to work together with the buyer and develop the account as business evolves and matures. And lastly, for mature buyers with medium to high volumes, you're probably already part of an established process. So understanding that, knowing what the role to play, will be key to making this collaboration work. And that was it for me. Thank you for listening, and I hope you got something out of it. I see that there are some questions.
Yes.
I don't know, time-wise.
Thank you, Henrik. Yes, we're okay for questions, and thank you very, very much. That was super insightful. I'm not going to try to repeat your little phrase in Swedish. There were a couple of things that stuck with me. Is the supplier is invited, the scenario where the supplier is invited to play but can't make the rules. I thought that was an interesting take. And obviously the importance of the first mile, it is as important, if not more important, than the last mile. But ultimately, collaboration and mirroring the buyer's process is kind of key to success. So before we take a look at the questions, we're going to get Pete to show us. He's showing us on the screen now the fantastic illustration and visual representation he has been diligently working on while Henrik was presenting. So it's fascinating how Pete and the team can condense so much information in such a kind of visual and I guess just short format. So thank you, Pete, very much. And Suzanne, if that's okay, I'll get you to pull up the first question. Thank you very much. So Henrik, can you expand a bit on the medium tier of the matrix, please?
Yes, of course. I think that the medium tier is the most interesting. I mean, from my perspective, coming from medium-sized LSP, this is the for clients that are not ready baked and that are they're still in the process of finding out where they are, where they are starting to experience some pain and are a bit. There are processes there in place. I think that's where you really can make a difference. You don't have to be a big player. You have to, with with an humble approach, approaching the existing client processes in a way that you touch as little as possible. They have probably good reasons to have arrived to the way that you're working, even if it looks insane from your perspective. Tweak it a bit in order to make it emit some structured content which you can then work with to have efficient processes on your end, and let them keep on doing what they are doing, because obviously they're doing something right, and even though you might not agree. I mean, everyone's the processes you would maybe not have devised them in this way, but they're making money, and in that sense, who are you to tell them to work otherwise?
Yeah.
At this point, at least.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. I think we have time for one last question, Suzanne. If I could get you to pull it up. Great. So could you give us some concrete examples of last miles from your experience, Henrik?
Yes. Let me think. Well,
or first miles for that matter.
first miles. Yeah, I think that most miles are first miles, but full trip is the best. No, I think the stupid ones, or the unnecessary ones, are the ones that comes to mind when you have situations where there's a lot of traffic to vendor portal type vendor portal type systems, where you collect handoff and you put them back, and in this is the most typical scenario, I would say, with regards to an unnecessary first mile and last mile, for that matter. Since all the data is there in digital form, you just have to make it accessible and put something up to start working with it. In terms of following the client towards working with them, I think that it's if a client wants to work with Google Sheets or something like that, that you wouldn't, or Excel for that matter, then having that and tweaking the setup of the data in tabular form, letting you then work with it. I think that's an excellent way. And I mean, you just have to take a peek at your client's house, and you will see that there's a lot of opportunities over there. Of course, not by the major leagues, but most of the businesses are in fact SMEs. So there's a lot of opportunity going on here.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Henrik. And I know you're going to be around later on. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation about last mile challenges or first mile challenges, you'll be more than happy to chat. So we have a break coming up now. The lounge is open, as we know, 24/7. So I hope to see you all there. And don't forget to, as you're virtually walking to the lounge, stop by our sponsor booths and say hello, show them some love. And thank you again, Henrik. Thank you very, very much for a really, truly thought-provoking and kind of insightful presentation in terms of what we can do and how we should approach, I guess, the kind of the integrations and the collaboration. So thanks again to everybody as well for joining us, and see you around.
Thank you.